There we go. Recording. So we do record this. It will be posted, so you can go back and watch it or share with friends or colleagues, family members. We do ask that you stay muted for the duration of the webinar so we don't have background noise distracting us. And we do ask that you leave your cameras turned off for the same reason. It kind of helps with bandwidth and distraction noises as well. We do welcome you to put questions in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. And I should have asked, Carolyn, do you want us to keep an eye on that as we go? And if things are relevant to that time, do you prefer to answer them as we go, or would you prefer to leave questions at the end of the session?
I think just for time management, we might want to leave them to the end. I often find when I'm presenting that I end up answering a lot of the questions that come up as I go along.
Absolutely. Perfect. So we will do that. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. Tomorrow you'll receive an evaluation from us. Please do share that. We love to hear from you. What went well, what didn't go well. If you have ideas for future presentations, we're always looking for new ideas. We've been doing this for a while, so I love seeing those new interesting things pop up in that evaluation form. Just a quick background on us. We're a nonprofit organization that's the voice for all of New Hampshire's 1,000 lakes, and we're working to restore and preserve the health of all those lakes. We do that through our programs. We have advocacy, which is just starting to wrap up here. Andrea, I'm sure you'll be giving sort of a season wrap up here at some point. We also have our conservation programs, which are just kicking off on full steam ahead right now. Our Lake Smart program, which has some fun and interesting updates coming soon, and our Lake Host program, we're in the process of getting everybody signed on, and that will really, the unofficial start is Memorial Day weekend. We have a lot of lake hosts out there monitoring boat ramps. And of course, our outreach program, bringing you this webinar tonight. And our big kickoff for outreach is the start of the season is Lakes Congress. We do still have some spots open. That's our in-person event we hold every year. Lots of great sessions this year. We have about 80% of our tickets sold out. So if you're waiting, it could be sold out soon. So get those tickets in before we're sold out. Oops, I think I skipped something here. And you can help support all these great programs that we are doing. Become a supporter. It's easy, newhampshirelakes.org/donate. And we have our spring appeal happening right now where donations are matched. So every dollar you donate turns into $2 until the end of May. Take advantage of that if you're thinking about donating. Now is the perfect time to do that. I don't know what keeps doing that. We're your hosts. I'm Erin Mastine, our outreach manager, and Andrea is joining us, like I mentioned before, our president and policy advocate, helping me keep an eye on the chat box. Thanks for coming tonight, Andrea. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our expert presenter, Caroline Hughes, Loon Preservation Committee biologist and outreach coordinator. And I will stop sharing and allow you to get to all the fun stuff.
Great. Well, while I'm getting this shared, I do just want to say thank you so much to NH Lakes and Erin and Andrea for having me here tonight. You guys do amazing and important work for our lakes and for the loons and all the other wildlife that call them home. So thank you for what you do. And thank you all for being in attendance tonight to talk about loons. This talk is going to cover, first of all, loon vocalizations, which I know are a big part of what make these birds so special for a lot of people, but also sort of a summer in the life of the loons. What are they going through? What does their nesting process look like? What are the threats that they face? And how can we help them to, minimize these threats and help them be more successful? So I'm just going to dive right in here. So we'll start off with those loon vocalizations. Loons make 4 different calls, and they're all used in different contexts and can help them communicate a lot of different information. So I'll start by playing each call and then giving you the name of that call and talking about what it means. Erin, if you could just give me a thumbs up if this audio plays. I've never tried to share it this way before. Okay, great. So that call that I just played is the tremolo. That is like the classic loon call. You hear it a lot in movies and TV. Hollywood has learned has come to believe that loon calls are really iconic symbols of the wilderness. So you hear the tremolo and the next call that I'm going to play, the wail, a lot whenever they're trying to, tell you that the scene you're watching is taking place in a remote spot, even if that spot happens to be in a place where a loon would never be, like the desert. So the tremolo is a call that loons use primarily to communicate that they're alarmed by something. So we'll hear loons tremoloing if they see an eagle fly overhead. If a person gets too close to them or their nest or their chicks, they might tremolo. They'll also tremolo if there is an intruding loon coming into their territory, so someone other than their partner. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what an intruding loon is in a couple of slides. The other cool thing about the tremolo is that it is the only call that loons have been documented to make while they are flying. And so if you ever, are in an area not near a lake and you hear that call, look up, because there might be a loon flying overhead. We think that they might make that call during flight to try to get a response from lakes that they're flying over. They might be considering whether they want to stop on that lake to forage or rest up. And if they get a response from below, that might be an indicator that it's not really a safe place to stop, and they might want to consider stopping somewhere else. So that's the tremolo. That's the wail. That's another really classic loon call. If you've been on a lake in New Hampshire or in New England, you've probably heard that call before. That is used for long distance communication, typically between the members of a pair. So if they're separated on the lake and are trying to find each other, they might wail back and forth and slowly get closer and closer together until they link back up. The other thing is, even if they're in close proximity, if they see or sense something that they're a little concerned by, they're maybe not feeling threatened yet, but they're a little bit concerned, then they might give a higher pitched version of that wail just to alert their partner to the fact that there's something that they might want to keep an eye on. So that call was the hoot. There's a little bit of static in that recording. I apologize, but hopefully you were able to hear the hoot come through. That is a call that you might not have heard unless you've had the pleasure of having a loon family, swim up to you sort of a little bit closer. That is a short distance communication call that loons use within their family unit. So the members of a pair will hoot to one another and to their chicks. It's just sort of a way to check in, make sure they know where everyone is. Sometimes if the parents have been foraging and they've surfaced with a fish for the chick and the chick's not paying attention, they might hoot to alert the chick to the fact that they have something that they want to feed to it. And so that call that I just played is the yodel, and I saved it for last because it's a really fascinating call that a lot of research has been done on. So the yodel is a call that is only given by male loons. So if you ever hear that, and you see the loon that's making it, you know that that is the male of the pair. It's one of the only ways that you can really definitively tell loons apart. Male and female loons are identical in plumage, and while male loons tend to be a little bit bigger than the females, that it can be really hard to tell that size difference on the water. And so unless your loons are banded and you happen to be able to get a glimpse of the bands, the yodel can be like really the only way that you can definitively know who is who in your pair. And so the yodel is a call that is used primarily for territory defense. Male loons will make the yodel in a lot of the same situations where a tremolo might be made by either a male or a female loon. So whenever they're feeling threatened by something and they're trying to, show strength and show that they're willing to fight off whatever that perceived threat is. So we do see loons, male loons yodeling when eagles fly overhead. If you have a particularly aggressive male loon, he might also yodel at planes that fly overhead. We don't know if they're mistaking them for an eagle or what, but it's pretty common for loons to yodel or even tremolo at planes. They will yodel if, again, a boat or a person gets too close to their nest or to their chicks. They will yodel if intruding loons come into their territory. And so this is a call that communicates a lot of information. So the research that has been done on yodels shows that there are a couple different types of information that loons are expressing to other loons and that other loons are able to pick up on from hearing that yodel. So the first is that the yodel tells another loon about the size of the loon that is making that call. A bigger male loon is going to give a deeper pitched yodel. So if you are a loon that doesn't have a territory of its own and you're a male loon and you're thinking of going into a lake and trying to fight the loon there for that territory, and you hear a really deep yodel, then that's a really big guy that you might not be able to take on in a fight. And so you might think twice. And similarly, if you hear a really high pitched kind of wimpy yodel, then you might choose to go and test the waters there and engage in some territorial interactions there, because you might be more likely to win if that loon is smaller. The other thing that the yodel indicates is the willingness of the loon that is yodeling to fight. So loons can add more syllables to that yodel, and the longer the yodel that they give, the more aggression that they're conveying. If a loon gives a really long yodel, what it's telling other loons is that, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to fight. Don't come in here because I will come over and fight you. Whereas a shorter yodel conveys a little bit less of that aggressive motivation. And so again, if you're an intruding loon and you hear a really long yodel, you might think twice about going in there, because you're very likely to get into a physical altercation with the loon that's yodeling if you confront that loon. It just, that long yodel conveys really, really aggressive motivation in a loon. The other thing that came out recently, a paper published just a couple of years ago, is that the yodel may also convey something about the age of the bird that is giving that call. They just found that there was something about the pitch of the yodel or the frequency of the yodel that conveyed a little bit of information about how old the loon giving it might be. And it was the frequency of a very certain piece of that yodel. So there's so much information being communicated in these calls. Now, the descriptions of when loons give these calls that I just provided really applies, all the time, but oftentimes people will ask me, well, okay, so what threat could my loons be encountering at night? My loons spend all night tremoloing and yodeling. And is it really that there's, something attacking them at night? And the answer to that is probably not. Loons at night do what we call the night chorus. And we're not entirely sure why they do that, but the night chorus is like all of the loons in the area will start doing wails, tremolos, and yodels, and they can go on for, tens of minutes to even an hour plus, just yodeling and tremoloing and wailing back and forth. Again, we don't entirely, exactly know why they do that, but we think it's sort of like a nightly roll call and a way for the loons that live either on a big lake that has multiple pairs or in a relatively small geographic area that has a lot of different lakes. It may be a way for them to get familiar with the voices of their neighbors and be able to know who's around on a nightly basis. So if you hear a yodel at night, it's not necessarily that there are two loons fighting out there. It might just be part of that sort of nightly check-in that they're doing. Okay, so before I get into a summer in the life of the loon, I want to just provide a little bit of background information about these birds that's important to, just understanding sort of the process that they go through each year. So loons are a long-lived species, and we actually do not yet know how long they can live to be. We only really started banding loons intensively in the late 80s, early 90s, and some of those loons that were first banded back then are still around today. The oldest known loons in the world are a male and a female that live out in Michigan. Used to be a pair, but in recent years have broken up. But they're in their late 30s to early 40s. And the oldest known loon here in New Hampshire was banded as an adult in 1993, so 32 years ago this coming summer. She was adult, so we know at that time she was at least 3 years old. And so if she's back again this year, she'll be at least 35. And so, these are really long-lived birds. They have a delayed age of reproduction. So even though loons reach adulthood at age 3, and that's when they will, come back to our lakes and start looking for a territory of their own, the average loon will not have chicks until it's 6 or 7 years old. That's because they spend a couple of years after they reach adulthood trying to find a territory and, gain control of it. And then once they have a territory, they might fail for the first year or two because they're not, picking the best nest site. So on average, a loon will not produce chicks until it's 6 or 7. And when they start producing chicks, loons will have at most 2 chicks per year. But our long-term data shows that the average pair here in New Hampshire fledges just 1 chick every other year. So they're adding to the population really, really slowly, but making up for it by the fact that they live such long lives. And so over the course of a loon's lifetime, it might produce something like 12 to 15 chicks that fledge. So all of that is going to become really important a little bit later on in the presentation when we talk about some of the major threats to loons. So just try to keep that in mind. Okay, so loons spend the winter on the ocean. This map shows the locations where about 30 banded New Hampshire loons have been resighted during the winter. So this is not a map of where every New Hampshire loon was sighted. And it's not that there are only 30 loons in New Hampshire, of course. It's just these are the 30 loons where we definitively know they were sighted during the winter. And you can see the majority of the loons that we have seen during the winter really spend the winter off of the coast of New England. I haven't had the chance to update this map, but within the last year or so, we actually had a couple sightings further south. 2 male loons that were down off of North Carolina. That's about a couple 100 miles further south than what we previously knew to be the furthest south that a New Hampshire loon was in the winter. But we think that those loons going that far are sort of outliers, or that it's a small percentage of the population. The bulk of our loon population that breeds here in New Hampshire is likely spending the winter off of the New England coast. I don't want to go to that yet. So because they are spending the winter so close, they're able to arrive back to our lakes basically the day that ice goes out. Oftentimes, part of the lake will still be iced over and the loons will be back. We think that what triggers migration in the spring is day length. So as the days start getting longer, the loons, recognize that spring is coming. They recognize that their lake should be opening up, and they start to take recon flights. They will fly back, check on their lake. If it still is covered in ice, then they might either go back to the ocean or land on a local water body like a river or a lake that iced out a little earlier, and spend time there until their lake opens up. Typically, they are back on the lake the day that the ice goes out. And it's really important for them to get back to their lakes early. And the reason why is because they are a territorial species. So most lakes in New Hampshire are really only big enough for 1 pair of loons. Loons need at least 50 acres in order to have enough of a prey base to sustain themselves and their chicks. Although there are some lakes in New Hampshire that are smaller than that have a loon pair. Typically, those are lakes that are stocked, and so they have sort of an artificially high fish population. But in general, they need at least 50, 60 acres. And often in practice, it's more like 100 acres that a pair needs. On a larger lake like Winnipesaukee or Squam, they're often defending territories that are like 100 to 150 acres in size. And so they want to get back to their lake first because they want to establish control of that lake. I mentioned in a couple slides ago that it's when loons reach 3 years old that they are adults. And when those young adults start coming back and looking for lakes, only 20% of them, only roughly 20% of them will find their first territory by settling on a lake that's not occupied by other loons. About 40% of loons will passively acquire a territory. So, that territory holder may have died over the winter and there's a vacancy and they fill in. And then the other 40% of those young adult loons will acquire their first territory by fighting with an established territory holder. And if they win that fight, then they take over that territory. So the loons that have been on a lake in the past, they want to come back to that same lake because they're familiar with it. They already know where the good nest site is. They already know where the good areas for foraging are. And so they're going to be more successful if they can be on the same lake year to year. But other loons, those younger adult loons, they see a lake that's occupied by loons. And what they're thinking is, hey, that guy thinks this is a good place to be. Maybe that's where I want to be. And so they come in and they, check to see if they might be able to take over that territory. Now, there's a wide range of territorial behaviors that loons will go through before it escalates to a fight, like the one in this photo. So they might do what's called the circle dance, which is where, there's a couple loons not the pair, but a member of the pair and some other loons that are interested in maybe taking over the territory. And they'll just sort of slowly swim in a circle. They'll dip their heads under. One may dive under, and when one dives under, they all dive under because no one wants to get stabbed from below, like in this picture. So the circle dance is sort of this really ritualized way of moving that allows loons to evaluate the other loons' fitness to help them decide if they want to fight. If they start to escalate from a circle dance, then they'll go into what we call a penguin dance. That's where they paddle their feet really rapidly to hold their bellies up in the air, show off that bright white chest. And that's a show of strength. The loons that are doing that penguin dance are trying to show the other loon that is considering fighting them how strong they are. Again, it's to help them decide whether or not they want to engage in a physical altercation, because these physical altercations can be deadly. We collect every dead loon that is reported to us in the state, and we get a necropsy for it to determine the cause of death. And about 6% of the adult loons that we have necropsied since 1989 have died from fights with other loons. So it pales in comparison to other causes of death that we've documented, but it's not nothing. These fights can be really serious. And so when it gets to the point, like in this photo, those loons are really, putting it all on the line for the sake of trying to either acquire a territory or to hold on to the territory that they already have. So a lot of fighting like this is happening now, from the time that loons arrive through the time when they start nesting. This is, the old territory holders are coming back, and those new adult loons are trying to find a territory, and they're hoping that they'll be able to acquire a territory before nesting season starts. At the same time, the pair members are getting acquainted or reacquainted with one another. So male and female loons do not, the male and female loon of a pair on a lake do not spend the winter together. Come fall, they will migrate at different times. They don't leave the lake together. They go to separate areas on the ocean. And so when they get back, they need to just sort of reestablish their pair bond if it's two loons that have been together before, or establish their pair bond for the first time. Now, courtship in loons is really subtle. They don't do any mating dances. So if you see sort of flashy, splashy behavior, what you're seeing is probably a fight and not courtship. Because courtship for loons really just looks like peaceful coexistence. There will be two loons in relatively close proximity, just kind of hanging out together. They might, be sleeping at the same time. They might be foraging together. They might be preening at the same time. But they're just sort of, loons that are close together and not fighting with one another. As we get to late May, we will start to see nesting happen. Typically, by the end of the first week in June, 50% of New Hampshire's loon pairs will be on a nest. When they nest, loons typically have 2 eggs, although sometimes they may have just 1. And on very, very rare occasions, they may have up to 3. But usually it's 2, and usually those eggs are laid about 60 hours apart. And so after the loons lay the first egg, it's not uncommon for them to kind of leave it alone. Sometimes we get calls at the loon center, from people who are concerned that the loons aren't sitting on their egg. But that's pretty typical, and it may be so that that first egg doesn't get too much of a head start on development compared to the second egg, since they are laid 60 hours apart. From the time that the first egg is laid to the time that the second chick hatches, it's usually somewhere between 26 to 28 days. And once that second egg has been laid, that is when the loons will start to incubate consistently. And so those eggs need to be sat on basically 100% of the time in order to maintain the proper temperature and humidity and other environmental conditions that will allow the eggs to develop properly. And so in order to allow that to happen, to allow the eggs to be attended while also allowing both of the adult loons to, be able to forage and take care of themselves, males and females share incubation duties, and they really share them pretty much 50-50. So a lot of the time people will see a bird on the nest and assume that it's the mom. And with loons, you can't make that assumption because it very well could be the male tending to those eggs. They're great dads. Because the eggs were laid about 60 hours apart, they do not hatch at the same time, but the second egg does hatch up over the course of those 26 to 28 days. So typically they're hatching something like 12 to 24 hours apart. Before I talk about chicks, I will just say that renesting can and does occur if a first nest attempt fails. And typically renesting will happen or will be more likely to happen if a nest fails earlier in the season. If a loon's nest fails in mid to late July, there's little chance that they're going to try again, because there just won't be enough time for them to hatch those chicks and then for the chicks to develop fully and be able to get off the lake before the ice comes in. But if a nest fails in, sometime in June, there's a good chance that that pair will try a second time. And sometimes we've had loons try even a third or a fourth time. So when the chicks hatch, they are what we call semi-precocial. So precocial in that there's a lot that they can do right away. They hatch, they're already covered in down. They're not naked like some bird species are when they hatch. And they really only need an hour or two on the nest to dry out before they're able to get in the water and swim. And on day one, they can even take dives, although they're so buoyant that the dives tend to be kind of short and they just pop back up above the water. But there's a lot that these chicks can do day one. The semi and semi-precocial comes from the fact that they are entirely dependent on their parents for food and for protection. And so because of that, a scene like this is very, very common during the first 2 weeks of a loon chick's life, where it rides on the back of one parent while the other parent is just kind of constantly diving and coming up with little fish or aquatic insects to feed to it. Backriding happens for a couple of reasons. First is for protection from underwater predators. These chicks are really tiny and they're a really easy target for things like snapping turtles or even large fish. And so being up on the parent's back just helps to protect them from that. Second is temperature regulation. These chicks can get cold really quickly. So being able to snuggle underneath mom or dad's wings helps to just keep them warm, helps to maintain their body temperature. And then third is energy conservation. These chicks have to do a lot of growing over a really short amount of time. By the time they're 12 weeks old, they'll be almost the size of the adults. And so anytime that they're able to save some energy by not having to swim around on their own, that's energy that they can use for growth instead of for motion. But by the time they're about 2 weeks old, they are no longer small enough to fit on their parents' backs. And so from that point on, they have to swim on their own. Before I move on, I do want to mention that when two chicks hatch, when we have a two-chick brood, sibling rivalry can be really, really common. The older chick, by the time its sibling hatches, it's been alive for 12 to 24 hours. It's already had its first swim. It's already been fed by the parents. And so it's stronger than its sibling. And it will sort of beat its sibling into submission often, to let the sibling know who's boss, to establish the pecking order. Particularly when it's mealtime, the first hatched chick will make sure that it eats its fill before it lets its sibling be fed. And that can sometimes lead to the sibling not surviving, just not getting enough food to sustain itself. And that can be really, really hard for us to watch or to know is happening. That's something that has evolved to ensure that in a hard year where maybe there's not enough food to feed both chicks, that inadequate supply isn't being divided in two, which would lead to two chicks that don't make it, but instead it's being funneled into one chick so that at least one survives. So really hard to watch, but there is some reasoning behind it. But of course, loon chicks don't stay small for long. So the chick in this photo is about 5 weeks old. And you can see there are several changes that have happened. Its bill is starting to lengthen and take on a little bit more of that characteristic loon bill shape. It's also starting to develop its first set of feathers. So you can see those feathers coming in on the face and a little bit on the back as well. They tend to look really scruffy and kind of funny at this stage. And the chick in this photo is begging the parent for food. So if you ever see a loon chick headbutting its parent, nipping at its parent's head or face or bill, that's what it's doing. It's letting the parent know that it's hungry and wants to be fed. Loon parents are very indulgent of their chicks. At this point, this chick can provide probably about 40% of its own food, 35 to 40%, but they're still really heavily dependent on their parents. And by the time they're 12 weeks old, loon chicks are, we consider them to be fledged. At this point, they are able to provide 100% of their own food, although they will continue begging their parents for food well past 12 weeks. We've had, pictures and videos from our volunteers of loon chicks that are like 18 to 20 weeks old, still being fed by their parents. So again, loons are very good and indulgent parents. Around 8 weeks of age is when loon chicks will start to exercise their wings to build up those muscles so that they're preparing for flight. And around 12 weeks old is when they should be able to achieve takeoff and fly for the first time. At this point in time, we're usually into September or even early October by the time the chicks are reaching 12 weeks of age. And so one parent might leave, go back to their ocean wintering grounds. Typically, after the first parent leaves, the second parent will stick around for another week or two, and then that parent will leave as well. And then these guys are on their own